Ethical Considerations and Biases in Generative AI Data. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's presentation on ethical considerations and biases in generative AI data. In this session, we will explore the ethical considerations and biases associated with generative AI data generation. Generative AI models have the ability to generate human-like text, images, or voices, but they also raise concerns about the origin and potential biases in the generated content. Let's dive into the details. Slide 1: Ethical Considerations and Biases in Generative AI Data. Generative AI models, with their remarkable ability to create realistic outputs, bring about ethical considerations and biases. For example, a generative AI model trained on biased social media data may generate text that perpetuates stereotypes or discriminatory language. This raises important questions about the biases present in the training data and the potential impact of those biases in the generated content. Slide 2: Biases and Limitations in Generative AI Models. Biases in generative AI models can stem from the biases present in the training data. If the training data contains biased text corpora, the generative AI model may produce outputs that exhibit the same biases. Additionally, generative AI models can unintentionally amplify biases present in the training data, resulting in the propagation of stereotypes or discriminatory content. For instance, a language model trained on historical literature might reproduce gender biases present in the texts, leading to gendered language patterns in its generated text. Slide 3: Impact of Biases in Generative AI Data. Generation bias. Generative AI generated content can have significant social and cultural impacts. It can perpetuate stereotypes, influence decision-making processes, and shape social perceptions and cultural narratives. For example, if generative AI generated images consistently depict certain racial or ethnic groups in a negative light, it can reinforce harmful stereotypes and misrepresentations. Moreover, biased generative AI generated data can lead to underrepresentation or misrepresentation of specific demographics, excluding diverse perspectives and perpetuating inequality. Slide 4: Responsible Use of Generative AI. To ensure the responsible use of generative AI, ethical considerations must be taken into account. Using generative AI to create deepfake videos without consent or for malicious purposes raises ethical concerns about misinformation and privacy infringement. Fairness and transparency are crucial in data generation. It is important to disclose the use of generative AI and address potential biases to promote responsible and fair data generation. For example, a generative AI project that publicly discloses the limitations, biases, and potential ethical implications of its data generation process promotes transparency and accountability. Slide 5: Mitigation Strategies for Addressing Biases. Addressing biases in generative AI data generation requires the implementation of mitigation strategies. One approach is to train generative AI models on diverse and representative datasets to mitigate biases and promote inclusivity in the generated outputs. Regular model evaluation using bias testing frameworks and evaluation metrics is also essential to identify and address any potential biases. For instance, a study evaluating the sentiment analysis outputs of generative AI models across different demographics helps ensure fair representation and reduce bias. Slide 6: Best Practices for Ethical Generative AI. Data generation. There are several best practices to follow for ethical generative AI data generation. Obtaining informed consent from participants when collecting data for generative AI is crucial, as is ensuring their privacy is protected. Rigorous bias testing and evaluation should be implemented to detect and mitigate biases in generative AI generated data. For example, a generative AI project that includes an extensive bias evaluation phase ensures ethical standards and fair representation in its generated outputs. Slide 8: Conclusion. In conclusion, the ethical considerations and biases in generative AI data generation call for responsible development practices. Prioritizing fairness, transparency, and accountability is essential. Continuous evaluation and improvement of generative AI models and data generation techniques are necessary to address biases and ensure ethical standards. Collaboration among researchers, developers, and diverse stakeholders is crucial in collectively identifying and addressing biases, fostering inclusive and ethical generative AI practices. For instance, collaborative initiatives involving experts from diverse fields, including ethics, social sciences, and computer science, working together to develop guidelines and frameworks for ethical generative AI data generation,